It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Hi, it's Feedback Friday, and Momo is with us. Hi, Momo. Say hi to everybody. Hello, everybody. Yeah, Momo's. Yes. You see a lot more Momo. Actually, I haven't done a ton of pet content lately because I've been doing constant boss fight updates. But on Patreon, if you want to see more pet stuff when I go back to doing that, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Okay, so The Last of Us 2 saga continues, right, Momo? You don't like that game, no. But yes, The Last of Us 2 saga continues. And I'm not quite sure where to start. There was a lot of very interesting feedback. I actually banned someone who's been a pain in the ass for a while, but she referred to my viewers as incels. And I'm like, all right, that's enough. This person has so many damn warnings. Remember, number one rule of this channel, come at me all you want, but do not attack other members of the community. And it was all's well that ends well, and I'm glad, but we did have a bit of a standoff on Twitch yesterday where somebody was being sort of typical internet and not recognizing that we don't treat each other that way in my communities. But it took a bit. It took a few warnings, but I got to give him credit. I said, look, people have asked you to stop. Please respect that. And they actually did. And they went on and they communicated and interacted with other people in the chat. And it worked out really well. So that made me happy. I'm glad that somebody actually stopped when they were asked to stop. That shouldn't be a big deal. Unfortunately, it is. But other things that were interesting. It's one person asked for some console exclusive first party games that don't see a large drop in sales after 7 days. The first example that springs to mind for me is Marvel Spider-Man. It only had something like a 42% drop from what I understand. It's one thing, like I said in the original video, 60% is average-ish. Naughty Dog games tend to have a larger drop. But Uncharted 4, which was a not very good game, in my opinion. I did not enjoy it as much as the previous ones. Uncharted 2 was sort of the high watermark in terms of story. Uncharted 3, the melee combat was better. Uncharted 4, I really didn't see the point. Speaking of the Uncharted Last of Us dichotomy, Amy Hennig was not a writer on The Last of Us. She was at the studio. Apparently there were some discussions, but she has never been a writer on The Last of Us. So let's just get that really clear. Love Amy Hennig. Was not a writer on The Last of Us. So that the fact that she is not at the studio does not have a direct connection to whatever's going on with this game. A lot of discussions in the comments, and this is bothering me more and more and more about how in the first game it was a fungus. And in this game they're infected. And it seems to be that they kind of torqued it, though they do refer to them as mushroom heads in places. But a lot of people who are scientists, and for people who are new here, my stepfather, before he retired, was a biochemist. And so things like the difference between a virus and a bacteria and a fungus, these things are important. And a lot of people have rightly pointed out that the game diverges from our world in 2013. In 2013, and now, there is no vaccine for a fungi. There are therapeutics, there are treatments, but there's no vaccine. So that's a strange thing that, granted, I don't consider that a spoiler because that's from the first game, in a way. But there was some ambivalence in the first game that has been retconned out of the second game. but I'm not going to talk about it yet because I'm giving people more time to play the game. I'm not one of those people who thinks that, oh no, play the game in the first week and then spoilers are fair game. No, I want to give people a bit more time because people have lives and things are still really crazy right now. And so people are like working through the game on their weekends. And so like based on that, even if they like go, 6 hours a day, both weekend days, they're not finished it yet. So I'm being very careful, but I want to talk structurally about the game because there's a lot of discussion about. Actually, no. Let's not talk about structure yet. Let's structure as let's focus on a comment. I love this phrase. Maybe that's why I'm Ed Dobbs said that The Last of Us 2 will stand as a polished turd. I disagree. Not meaningfully, but I actually think I'm actually starting to feel really bad for the combat designers in The Last of Us 2 because there are a lot of really cool combat mechanics that somebody smeared crap all over. Like, if they had stuck to the purity of a revenge plot and not done all that other Riverdale teen angsty shit, there would have been more combat. And so even if the story totally sucked, which in my opinion it still does, like it's getting worse and worse and worse. It's not getting better. It is getting objectively more stupid. Nobody is learning from anything that happens. They are all bizarre idiots. They're still acting like spoiled brats in a suburban high school, even though they're supposed to be young adults, even though they live in the situation they live in. They live in post-apocalyptic circumstances. And I just grew up in a rough neighborhood and you grow up quicker than that. But structurally, there is so much waste and so much bloat, and it just dilutes what's good about the game, which is that kind of, find a defensible position for a bit, take care of a few things, run somewhere else, find a defensible position. Now, I do think that the enemies are way too good at hitting you when you're running. And I do think that Ellie's endurance is complete crap while running, considering, her entire life. She's walking and running and horseback riding and swimming, and she'd have more endurance than they have in the game. But that's partially the leveling system, which makes no sense in this scenario. You're talking about somebody who is going into this fairly physically fit. And then she's suffering a lot of physical injury, which you think would wear down her endurance, as opposed to her becoming more powerful and more adept with these weapons, which that'd be really interesting if the difficulty actually ratchets up because the character is getting worn out. That would be something I would be very interested in seeing that experiment and playing that experiment, because that would make sense. The problem is partially what's going on the screen and what's going on my controller have no connection to each other. And so, okay, maybe I'll meet you halfway, Ed. I'll meet you, I just caught the screen name. Wow, I'm slow on the uptake. Oh, no, sorry, wrong. Ed Dobbs, I will meet you halfway. It's a gold nugget wrapped in a turd that they then polished with pretty graphics. There we are, consensus. Flying FOCs said that it's funny you bring up the word masterpiece being overused because I've heard the phrase is an instant classic and defines a generation so much that they've lost any meaning to me. Like, remember when they said that about Boyhood? I think that's the movie. Who remembers Boyhood? It's like the most acclaimed film where every aspect individually can be described as okay. And this is where I want to touch on. Every summer we have to get something culture war in gaming. And I think that's just because in the summer there isn't like, especially this year when normally there's all the E3 stuff and we don't have E3 this year, and so it's more spread out, and we don't have a price on the PS5 or the Xbox yet. So I'm surprised that Mixer shutting down didn't get more attention, but maybe Mixer shut down because nobody gave a shit. That's me being snarky, because it's always something culture war. And I want to talk about that because part of the reason based on your comments from this week, an overall theme in the commentary is not just that the game failed to meet expectations. And let's face it, I don't know how any game could have met expectations based on the hype coming out of the first one. Fair is fair, right? But even though the game didn't meet expectations, what's really pissing people off is the behavior of primarily Neil Druckmann, but also Naughty Dog representatives and Sony as a company. And they're doing some things that they contacted a Vice reviewer, the guy who reviewed the game for Vice. And what didn't you like about it? Apparently they argued with him a bit. Now, I agree with Sony that I think that the Vice reviewer saying that the gameplay is essentially the same to the first game, he is objectively wrong on that point. But if you follow up with every reviewer who is just talking out their ass, that's all you'll do. Personally, I think the fact that they targeted Vice is an indication of who their target market is. You know, they didn't complain about, what was it, Polygon? Because Polygon and Kotaku don't do numbered reviews anymore, right? So they don't contribute to the Metacritic score. I didn't see a review on the Vice review either, but the fact that they weren't taking issue with the fact that some of the biggest game sites didn't think it was flawless, they didn't take issue with that. They took issue with a hipster douchebag site. And if you like Vice, I apologize. But let's face it, full disclosure, Vice were a bunch of assholes to me more than once. And part of the reason I got blacklisted by a few gaming conventions up here was because there was a relative of one of the founders of Vice there, and I wrote an article critical of a keynote that founder gave, and all of a sudden I was persona non grata in everything they did. So perhaps I'm a bit biased here, disclosing that because that's the correct thing to do, right? Take my opinions here with a grain of salt when I say that Vice is a hipster douchebag publication. I also know people who worked for the Vice, like extended, like Vice TV or whatever the hell they call it up here in Canada, and they were not treated very well at all. So again, I am kind of biased, but that's besides the point. Right is right and wrong is wrong. I can say that there have been gameplay improvements to the first one. I think there are other things that they did with the gameplay that kind of trip over their own feet. The way the weapons behave and the way people respond to the weapons at times make no goddamn sense. Pardon the goddamn for those of the religious persuasion here, but even if someone is wearing a bulletproof vest, a shotgun blast to the chest or a rifle shot at close range is going to knock them down. It bruises, it doesn't penetrate the skin, but it's going to knock them down. And if this was, you know, a weird Japanese, like totally surreal, divorced from the real world game, that would not be an issue. You accept what the game is doing because it makes its own rules. Because The Last of Us 2 is essentially set in an alternate timeline in our world, you can't give it that. Things have to behave the way they do in the real world. And there have just been some, like, You get knocked down by a rifle shot, like knocked right off, not rifle, a handgun shot, right off your feet. Not at close range, just knocked right off your feet. At first, that mechanic is fun. But after a while, it's just so sluggy that it's frustrating. And some people mentioned in the comments I hadn't commented on the violence yet in my videos. I am at the point where the violence just annoys me. I'm really torn on the dogs because as a gameplay mechanic, they're kind of neat. The dogs are the feature that force you to kind of not camp out and do that typical stealth play. It causes the gameplay to be more fast-paced, more chaotic, less predictable, which is an interesting experience and almost approaches fun were it not for the jank and other elements. And the fact that the controls just feel gummy. It just takes too long for the input to respond, in my opinion. The violence committed against the dogs is ridiculous in a way that, how do I put this, offends my intelligence more than my sensibilities. Like, there are some acts that you do to these dogs that are just not physically possible based on body weight, etc. And I'm not going to describe the acts because that would violate YouTube policy. And somebody asked why I don't put my streams up on YouTube anymore. There's actually a practical reason for that. There is a bug that affects me on YouTube that if I export from Twitch, I can't use the classic uploader unless I wipe all the history, clear all the cookies, everything like that from my machine. That really messes me up because it logs me out on everything. And it's obnoxious to have to re-sign in two-step every freaking website I use on my desktop. That's why I stopped uploading stuff to YouTube. Because of that. It was just too frustrating. And I've multiple times hoped it got fixed and then it broke again. And Twitch accounts are free. You can watch my past streams on Twitch. Please join Twitch if you are interested in the live gameplay. Because quite frankly, Twitch's monetization is better. And I continue doing this YouTube content for people here. I'm continuing to work on Boss Fight. Patreon's got another update about it. But the live gameplay, for numerous reasons, is staying on Twitch for the time being. But the biggest one, obviously, is that glitch, which is it's just me. Like, I get no help managing my content. So I can only do so much. And if I take on more there, then, oh my God, it's going to take me 3 months to get every episode of Boss Fight out. And I don't want to do that. I want to get this series done. And I want to do other things. I'm working multiple jobs right now. But getting back to this culture war thing, there are absolutely valid reasons to dislike various things that The Last of Us 2 does. Shining example is, my guess is that they rearranged the order of certain scenes mid-development, and stuff that was actually early gameplay in the original incarnation became flashbacks in the finished version. And so about 15 hours in, all of a sudden you get a tutorial. And there's this weird phenomenon that happens that Ellie knows what these monsters are. She knows what the different types of infected are. She knows their names, so it's assumed she knows how to fight them. But the player doesn't. And the game gives you no help. And Ellie talks to herself the entire time. So all they would have had to do is have a few lines here and there and going, okay, reminding herself how to fight these particular different types of infected. It would feel much less dissonant had they done that, because the fact that the character has knowledge that the player doesn't, and it affects the gameplay, anywhere else, that would be considered a mistake. Just saying. You know, if you want that, have a new character, like, say, Abby. She's right there, being the first time you encounter these monsters, and she doesn't know how to fight them. That's my other structural complaint with the game, is that Abby just disappears for far too long to be a secondary playable character. Like, inexcusably long. Again, there are some fundamental gameplay things that are quite good in this game. But you're separated from them for so long with these weird exploration levels that just pad the playtime, that you never really develop, or it takes far too long to develop, the requisite muscle memory to actually feel proficient in the combat. And I'm sorry, that's just a mistake. And yes, you can dumb down the difficulty, so that's not an issue, but I don't want to dumb down the difficulty. I want to feel the satisfaction of starting off sucking and getting better. That's a big part of the reason that gamers play games. And if you don't give people enough chances so that they can experiment, especially with the frenetic pace of the gameplay that they've designed, people don't get better. You end up feeling like you're fluking through levels instead of developing real skill. And Ellie is a character who we know has been killing these things since she was like, what, 14? I might suck, but she shouldn't. So, you know, that has nothing to do with the politics of the game. That has nothing, and you know, people might say, oh, but, you know, you were inclined to be biased against it because politics, yada, yada, yada. No. There are plenty of games I've gone into thinking I'm absolutely gonna hate them. The Witcher 3 is a shining example. I did not like The Witcher 2. It was too coarse. I didn't like the random choices you had to make that totally cut off entire segments of the gameplay. The dialogue was coarse. I thought Triss Merigold was a doormat. None of it made sense to me. And so the only reason I played The Witcher 3 was because it was free with the video card I bought. I'm like, whatever, it's free, I'll try it. And I was just prepared to be repelled by it in the exact same way I was repelled by Witcher 2. But Witcher 3 is such a good game. I mean, just adding Yennefer, finally, getting Yennefer back into the mix of Witcher lore, just lifted the whole thing. And then having Ciri in there as well. But I mean, that's an example of, you know, preconceptions. The Metro series is the opposite. Yes, it's coarse. Yes, it does some things that stylistically are not to my taste, but the shooter gameplay in it is just so good. I really enjoy those games, even though I own Metro Exodus and haven't played it. I just haven't had the time. So I am not the kind of person that just gets dead set biased against a game and then can't enjoy it. And I'm somebody who enjoyed Assassin's Creed 3 and the original Mass Effect, even though those games took me about 10 hours to figure out that I knew what I was doing. But that isn't because they weren't giving me the core mechanics. It just, at least in the case of Assassin's Creed 3, it just kept giving me more and more mechanics to learn. With Mass Effect, it was, I kept trying to play it like a real-time shooter and not realize that you've got to use that I forget what they call it, VAT system, essentially, the weapon wheel with the biotics and stuff like that. You have to play it as sort of a semi-pause. I will defend games that take a long time to get going. But The Last of Us 2 has exhausted my tolerance on that level. If I were part of the review process, I could not, in good conscience, even if I loved the back half of the game, give an incredibly high score from a game that wastes the player's time for 15 plus hours. I just can't. Reviews are supposed to be consumer information tools. That matters. Get on with it. People's time is precious. And it just... And the last thing that really bothers me that has nothing... Well, maybe it's a little bit inside baseball, but I have seen plenty of dev teams work with limited resources to create utterly magical experiences. And they're not perfect. The graphics aren't necessarily top notch, but they're fun. And they stay with you and they make you think. And there are too many scenes in Naughty Dog, The Last of Us 2, that just come across like Naughty Dog flaunting their ginormous development budgets. It's just maps that get used for almost nothing and scenes that are just walking simulators where next to nothing happens. And you spend 45 minutes putting hats on fucking dinosaur skeletons and it's just like, this is masturbatory. This is just showing off. This is the car that people buy up here because our winters are so harsh that it's a really sweet car, but you can only drive for 2 months of the year because you can't drive when it's raining and you can't drive when it's snowing. It is pissing money away. And then to keep in mind that they crunched their employees and there was really high staff turnover, not cool. I don't want to reward that. Like, if you were developing something really freaking innovative in terms of gameplay, and yeah, you push your staff too hard, but you kind of see it on the screen and go, yeah, I see how this was sort of like someone could get caught up in just how exciting and cool and innovative this was. But other than a few combat tweaks, which other games have not been rewarded for, Personally, I think, and this is unpopular opinion coming, the improvements to gameplay, even though they were janky in places, when they rebuilt the Assassin's Creed franchise from the ground up with Unity, with that parkour, that more free-running parkour system, even though getting into Windows was a pain in the ass in it, they fixed that for subsequent games. But in terms of overall how the games played and the way the crowds worked and yeah, Unity was buggy and the load screens were interminable, but I felt like it was a worthwhile thing that they maybe should have polished for another 3 months, and no problem, you guys will refine this and this will be friggin' badass in the next game. But of course, Assassin's Creed games, they're 2 years apart, right? You don't have to wait 5 to 7 years for the next installment. And so that's a little bit more forgivable, right? And I'm sorry, in terms of nuisance level cosmetic bugs, The Last of Us 2 is just as bad as Unity was. Just as bad. It didn't have those really long load screens, but that's really the only thing. It is buggy. Doors that are right off its hinges and don't fall down. Characters falling through objects. I actually grabbed an enemy through a wall in one case. Enemies are falling through floors. Details are popping in. I'm actually chronicling the bugs on my Twitch channel, the ones that I find that are especially funny. They need producers. They need better producers. They need better pre-production. And it's interesting because one of my big issues with Ellie as a character is she acts like somebody who has never learned to accept the word no, who has never had to listen to the word no in her life. And that's what it feels like the higher-ups are also experiencing with this game at Naughty Dog. Neil Druckmann has to learn to listen instead of just demonizing people who don't like what this was. You know, I'm not a racist bigot, okay? I have not consumed the bigot sandwiches. They're steak. I don't eat meat. There's problems. And I'm really trying hard to not get offended by the depictions of Jewish people and bisexual women in the game, but fuck, man. Like, it just so many stereotypes. So many stereotypes. And that's only the thin edge of the wedge. And yes, there are some people who SJW and all that stuff, but those should be background noise at this point. There are plenty of games that have come out with a progressive message that did not get hammered like this. The issue is not a progressive social message, because quite frankly, I found Death Stranding pretty progressive myself. But it's not about a progressive social message. When you tell people, if you don't like this, you're automatically something, 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 the core gamer demographic is so used to being dismissed that way that it doesn't inhibit them. It makes them more angry. And I shouldn't talk about it like I'm not a part of it. I'm a gamer. But I'm not the type of person who responds that way. I'm like, bleh. I'm just going to go on and do what I'm doing anyway. Call me all the names you want. Happens to me every day on social media. And that's sort of the weird thing, that they're rejecting the criticisms of people who are YouTubers and who are people who do this for a living like me. And we all take shit. We all know what it's like to get dogpiled. We all know what it's like to get brigaded. We all know what's like for people who just hate our guts for reasons we don't understand and want to ruin us, and it doesn't make a ton of sense. And so accusing us of just having some hateful agenda instead of us just not liking this particular game, that's kind of foolish. And look, I know it hurts to work really hard on something and to have people not like it. It's embarrassing. It's frustrating. It feels unfair. But these are very wealthy people who make a lot of money, a lot more money than I do, a lot more money than most people doing this do. It would be best if Sony stopped like fighting with people who didn't like the game, even if the reviewer is wrong. And like I said, I think the Vice reviewer is wrong. But I've seen a lot of game reviews where I think people are wrong. Sony didn't chase people down for not getting Death Stranding. Why the special treatment? And maybe the Sony rep thing is inaccurate. Maybe it was actually a Naughty Dog rep who, like, their official title is Sony, but they're only on the Naughty Dog brand. Maybe that's the difference. But bad luck, Sony, when you've got a new console coming out. Between the censorship stuff and this, it's not a good foot forward. Now, this affects a fairly small group of people, which is why I'm continuing to track that sales data. And I'll close on this, even though this video's gone a bit long. Feedback Fridays tend to, and videos have gone long this week. But the reason I am so interested in the week-to-week drop-off is because that determines whether it's just kind of a cluster of angry people on the internet, which, you know, there are some big subreddits out there, but they're not that big, right? They're not big enough to result in millions of people suddenly going, no, you know, pass. And granted, the sales growth from the first game has been huge. There's obviously people playing this game who didn't play the first one. all the more reason why the tutorial is inexcusably bad or missing and shows up 15 hours in. But that kind of drop off, that isn't just people brigading a review score. That isn't what happened with the Captain Marvel movie, right? Which, for the record, I didn't think was that great, but I didn't find it offensive either. I just found it kind of boring. Except for Goose the cat. I love Goose. Well, he's a flurkin, but I like Goose. But if we see those 85% drop-offs replicating outside of Britain and Japan, that's an indicator that word of mouth was negative. And word of mouth isn't the internet. Word of mouth is people talking amongst their friends and having one-on-one conversations. And that's usually an indication that you need to go back to the drawing board and humble and put out something that isn't quite so much the equivalent of rubbing your player base's nose in dog shit. And to close, because of the name of a video that you guys like this week, if you're going to come across like your creative vision was a product of smelling your own farts, don't put a gameplay mechanic in your game that is an ability to see your own scent trails. Because that means you built a gameplay mechanic that is essentially smelling your own farts. Okay, I'll leave it there. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.